I came to the family barbecue armed with a secret that would finally end my dad's cruel jokes. But the DNA test in my pocket held a truth far more devastating than I ever imagined. The smell of charcoal and cheap lighter fluid is, for me, the official scent of family drama. It's the smell of my dad, Mark, holding court by the grill, tongs in one hand, a beer in the other, wearing that stupid kiss the cook, forgive the carcinogens apron my mom got him for Father's Day 5 years ago. It's the smell of forced smiles, of biting my tongue, of pretending that the knot in my stomach is just from the extra-large helping of my aunt's questionable potato salad. But today, the knot wasn't from the food. Today, I had brought my own special dish to the annual summer barbecue, and it was about to be served ice cold. The sun was beating down on our perfectly manicured backyard, the one Dad spent every Saturday morning tending to with the focus of a brain surgeon. My cousins were screaming and chasing each other through the sprinklers, their laughter mixing with the classic rock station Dad always had blaring from the portable speaker. Everything looked perfect. Like a commercial for a life insurance company, a happy family secure in their future without a single dark secret lurking beneath the surface. What a load of crap. In my pocket, my hand was wrapped around a single crisp envelope. The paper was already starting to feel soft and worn from how many times I'd taken it out and stared at it over the past week. It felt heavier than a simple piece of paper. It felt like a grenade with the pin already pulled. I just had to decide when and where to let it go. My whole life, I've been the odd one out. Dad is barrel-chested with sandy blonde hair that's starting to thin and bright blue eyes. My mom, Karen, is petite with the same fair features. My uncle David, Dad's brother, is practically his twin. Their kids are all little blonde-haired, blue-eyed clones. And then there's me. I'm tall and lanky with a shock of dark brown hair that's always been unruly and eyes so dark they're almost black. I was the lone raven in a flock of doves. It started as a little observation from extended family. "Oh, he must get his looks from your great-great-grandmother's side, Karen," they'd say, trying to solve the genetic puzzle that was my face. But it was my dad who turned it into a running joke. Anytime I did something clumsy or got a bad grade or expressed an interest in something other than football, he'd clap his hands together and boom for everyone to hear. "Well, that settles it. There was definitely a mix-up at the hospital." The first time he said it, I was maybe 7. I ran to my room crying, and my mom came in to soothe me. "Oh, sweetie, you know your father is just joking," she'd said, stroking my hair. "He loves you more than anything." But she never told him to stop. Not once. So the joke festered. It became his go-to party trick. At Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, and especially the annual barbecue, the Alex was adopted joke was as reliable as the sunset. The family would chuckle, some uncomfortably, and I would just have to sit there and take it, my face burning with a mixture of shame and a rage I couldn't explain. This year, I was 22, and I was done taking it. The joke hadn't just been a joke. It had been a seed of doubt planted so deep within me that it had grown into a monstrous, thorny vine, choking out any sense of belonging I ever tried to cultivate. So 2 months ago, I'd secretly ordered a DNA test. Not the fun kind where you find out you're 10% Irish. The serious, paternity test kind. I'd snagged a water bottle my dad had been drinking from, swabbed it like a forensic investigator, and sent it off with my own sample. When the results came in, I didn't feel vindicated or triumphant. I just felt hollow and very, very cold. Alex, Earth to Alex. "Stop daydreaming and grab me another beer, would you, champ?" Dad's voice sliced through my thoughts. He gestured with the tongs, a half-cooked burger patty dangling precariously. I forced a smile. "Sure, Dad." As I walked to the cooler, my Uncle David intercepted me, clapping me on the shoulder. "Looking good, Alex. College treating you well?" he asked, his smile genuine. David was always the kinder of the two brothers. He was the one who would ask me about my art classes and actually listen to the answer. It almost made what I was about to do feel worse. Almost. "It's going okay, Uncle David. Just busy." "I hear you," he said, grabbing a beer for himself. "Your dad's on a roll today. The burgers are only 60% burnt." We both shared a small laugh. It felt like a normal moment. A precious, fragile, normal moment that I was about to shatter into a million pieces. I brought the beer to my dad. He took it with a nod, taking a long swig. "Attaboy," he said, turning back to his audience of aunts and uncles. He was telling some exaggerated story about a fishing trip, his arms waving wildly. I faded back into the periphery, finding a spot on the edge of the deck, my hand returning to the envelope in my pocket. I could feel the raised lettering of the lab's address through the fabric. My heart was a drum solo against my ribs. "Just wait for the right moment," I told myself. "He'll give you the opening. He always does." And sure enough, it came about an hour later. Lunch was served, and everyone was gathered around the large patio table. I was trying to saw through a piece of well-done steak when I accidentally knocked over my glass of water, sending a wave across the table that just barely missed my mom's lap. "Whoa, Butterfingers!" she yelped, jumping back. I started apologizing profusely, grabbing napkins to soak up the mess. My face was on fire, and then I heard it, my dad's booming laugh. He wiped a tear of mirth from his eye, pointing at me with his fork. "See? See what I mean?" he announced to the entire table. The usual silence fell as everyone turned to him, anticipating the punchline they'd heard 1,000 times. The grace of a newborn giraffe. I'm telling you, our real son is out there somewhere, probably captain of his football team, and we got stuck with the exchange student. A wave of laughter rippled through the family. A few people shot me sympathetic glances, but nobody said a word. My mom just sighed, a quiet, defeated little sound. "Oh, Mark." That was it. That was the moment. The air in my lungs turned to ice. The background noise of the kids playing and the music faded into a dull roar. Everything sharpened into a single point of focus, my dad's smug, laughing face. Slowly, deliberately, I stood up. The scraping of my chair legs on the wooden deck was unnaturally loud in the sudden lull. All eyes turned to me. They probably expected me to storm off like I did when I was a teenager. They weren't expecting this. My hand didn't even shake as I pulled the envelope from my pocket. I held it up for a second, letting the crisp white paper catch the afternoon sun. Then, with a flick of my wrist, I tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed with a soft, definitive slap right next to the potato salad. The laughter died instantly. You could have heard a pin drop. My dad's smile faltered, confusion clouding his features. "What's that, son? Your final grades? Hope you did better in biology than you did in plate stacking." I ignored him. My eyes were locked on my mother. Her face had gone chalk white, her hand frozen halfway to her mouth. She knew. Oh, God, she knew exactly what that envelope was. I let the silence hang in the air for a beat longer, savoring the pure, uncut tension. Then I shifted my gaze from my mother, past my father, and landed squarely on my Uncle David. "You've been telling that joke my whole life, Dad," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I just thought it was finally time we all learned the punchline." I slid the envelope across the table with 2 fingers until it stopped right in front of my uncle's plate. "Why don't you do the honors, Uncle David?" I asked, my voice dropping to just above a whisper, yet carrying across the silent yard like a gunshot. "Open it. Read the name listed under Father." The world seemed to shrink until it was just the space between my uncle and that white envelope. The classic rock from the speaker sounded tinny and distant, like a memory from another life. The kids had stopped playing by the sprinkler, sensing the sudden adult shift in the atmosphere. They stood frozen on the lawn, water dripping from their hair. My Uncle David stared at the envelope as if I'd just placed a live scorpion on his bread plate. His face, usually tanned and creased with easy laughter, was a pale, slack mask of disbelief. It was my dad, of course, who broke the spell. He let out a short, incredulous bark of a laugh. "Okay, very funny, Alex. You got us." He started to reach for the envelope, ready to end the prank. "What did you do, print up a fake birth certificate from the internet?" Father, Darth Vader? I flattened my palm on the envelope before his fingers could touch it, my eyes never leaving my uncle's. "It's not for you," I said, my voice low and steady, "and it's not a joke." That's when my mother broke. It wasn't a loud, dramatic wail. It was a small, wounded sound, a single sob that she tried to choke back, but it escaped anyway. "Alex, please," she whispered, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. "Please stop. Don't do this, not here." Her plea was a confession. Every single person at that table heard it. The quiet murmurs started, a ripple of whispers spreading through the family. My dad's hand froze mid-air. His blustering, performative anger evaporated, replaced by a cold, dawning horror. His head snapped from my face to my mother's, then to his brother, David, who looked like he was a single deep breath away from passing out. The pieces were clicking into place behind his eyes, forming a picture so ugly he couldn't bear to look at it. "Karen?" Dad's voice was different now. The jovial barbecue host was gone. This was a man standing on the edge of a cliff. "Karen, what the hell is going on?" She couldn't answer. She just shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks, a silent, desperate appeal for me to take it all back. But I couldn't. I'd carried this weight my entire life. It was time for the rest of them to feel it. I gave the envelope another push, sliding it the final few inches across the table until it touched my uncle's hand. He flinched. "Read it, Uncle David," I said, my voice hardening, "because if you don't, I will, and I'll make sure everyone hears it." It felt like an eternity passed before his hand, trembling violently, finally closed around the envelope. The sound of the paper tearing open was like a rip in the fabric of our family. He fumbled with the single sheet inside, unfolding it with clumsy, shaking fingers. His wife, my Aunt Susan, had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. David's eyes scanned the page. I watched his breath hitch in his chest. I watched the last bit of color drain from his face. He swayed on his feet, and for a second, I thought he was going to collapse right there. "David! David, what is it?" Susan cried, her voice shrill with panic. My dad couldn't stand it anymore. He was a man of action, not suspense. With a roar of frustration and rage, he lunged across the table, knocking over a glass and snatching the document from David's limp grasp. He held it up. His own eyes, those bright blue eyes that were so unlike mine, frantically scanning the black and white text. I saw his jaw clench. I saw his shoulders go rigid. I saw the moment his world tilted on its axis. He looked up, and the look on his face will be burned into my memory forever. It was a raw, primal agony. The look of a man who has just been stabbed in the back by the one person he trusted most in the world. His gaze landed on his brother. "You," he choked out, the single word dripping with a venomous mix of hatred and heartbreak. "My own brother." His voice broke. "All these years. With my wife. You." He couldn't even form the sentence. The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. A collective gasp went through the aunts and uncles. Aunt Susan let out a strangled wail and buried her face in her hands. My mother was openly sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. David just stood there, mute, the perfect picture of a man caught in the ultimate betrayal. It was working. The truth in all its devastating glory was finally coming out. The lie we'd all been living was crumbling to dust. Mark took a step towards David, his hands clenching into fists. The years of brotherly love had vanished, replaced by a murderous rage. "I'll kill you," he whispered, his voice shaking with the effort of control. But then, something unexpected happened. David, who had been frozen in a state of shock, slowly lifted his head. He looked from the paper in Mark's hand to his brother's devastated face, and a flicker of confusion crossed his own features. He shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible movement. His voice, when it came, was a hoarse, ragged whisper, but it cut through the chaos like a razor. "Mark, that's not my name." The world stopped spinning again. Mark froze, his fist halfway to his brother's face. He looked down at the paper again as if he'd misread it. David's eyes found mine across the wreckage of the family lunch, and they weren't just guilty anymore. They were filled with a new, deeper kind of terror. "Alex," my uncle whispered, his voice trembling. "Who is Michael O'Connell?" Michael O'Connell. The name echoed in the sudden cavernous silence. It wasn't a name I knew. It wasn't a cousin or an old family friend or anyone I could place in the faded photographs on our mantelpiece. It was the name of a stranger, and it had just detonated in the center of my life, leaving a crater far deeper and more terrifying than the one I had planned. For a few seconds, nobody moved. We were all statues in a twisted museum exhibit titled Family Obliterated. My father, Mark, stood frozen, the DNA report clutched in his white-knuckled fist, his face a canvas of utter bewilderment. The murderous rage that had been directed at his brother moments ago had nowhere to go. It was an arrow shot at the wrong target, now tumbling uselessly through the air. Uncle David took a shaky step back from the table, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of dawning relief and sheer horror. He had been accused, tried, and nearly convicted in the space of 30 seconds, and now he was exonerated by a ghost. But the relief was fleeting, because the implications of that ghost's name were infinitely worse than a simple, sordid affair. All eyes, one by one, swiveled to the only person who could possibly have the answer. My mother. If she had looked pale before, she was now translucent. The name Michael O'Connell had been a key turning in a lock deep inside her, and it had unleashed something monstrous. She wasn't just crying anymore. She was staring blankly at the half-eaten potato salad, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her hands were pressed flat on the table, as if she were the only thing keeping the world from flying apart. "Karen?" My dad's voice was barely a whisper. He took a hesitant step toward her, holding out the paper like it was venomous. "Karen, who is this? Who is Michael O'Connell?" She didn't respond. She didn't even seem to hear him. It was as if she had retreated to a place so far inside herself that none of us could reach her. The illusion of our perfect family barbecue was not just cracked, it was atomized. My Aunt Susan rushed to her husband's side, grabbing his arm as if to reassure herself he was still there. My other relatives were starting to push their chairs back, murmuring to each other, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and a desperate desire to flee. This was no longer a drama they could comfortably watch from the sidelines. This was a contagion, and they were all in the blast zone. My own mind was a whirlwind of confusion. My entire plan, my righteous, carefully orchestrated moment of vengeance, had been built on a false premise. I had spent my life believing my otherness came from my uncle. I had seen his dark hair, his slightly lankier build, and woven a narrative of betrayal that made perfect, painful sense. I had been so sure, but the truth was a wild card I had never even considered. All the anger I had stockpiled, all the bitterness, it was all for the wrong man. I looked at Uncle David, at his terrified, innocent face, and a wave of nauseating guilt washed over me. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking. I moved around the table and knelt beside her chair. The smell of her perfume, a scent that had meant comfort and safety my entire life, now smelled like lies. "Mom, look at me. Who is he?" She flinched at my touch, her eyes finally lifting from the table to meet mine. And what I saw in them terrified me more than anything else. It wasn't just guilt or sadness. It was pure, undiluted fear. She looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was the ghost who had just been summoned to her table. You weren't supposed to," she stammered, her words disjointed and breathless. "You were never supposed to know." "Know what?" my dad roared, his patience finally snapping. He slammed the DNA report down on the table, making the glasses jump. "Know that you cheated on me, that my son, our son, isn't mine, I think I have a right to bloody well know." His voice, filled with the raw agony of a man whose entire life had been revealed as a sham, seemed to finally break through her stupor. She squeezed her eyes shut and a single guttural sob ripped through her. It wasn't, "Oh God," she choked out. The chaos reached a fever pitch. One of my cousins started crying. Aunt Susan was trying to pull David towards the house, away from the wreckage. "We should go," she was saying. "This is a private matter." But it was too late for privacy. I had made sure of that. I grabbed my mom's hand. It was ice cold. "Mom, I'm sorry," I whispered, and I meant it. I hadn't wanted this. I hadn't wanted to uncover a mystery that filled my own mother with such primal terror. I just wanted the jokes to stop. "Just tell us who he is." My dad loomed over us, his face purple with rage. "Tell us, Karen. Tell us, or I swear to God." My mother finally looked up, her tear-filled eyes not looking at her husband, but directly into mine. Her expression was one of absolute soul-shattering panic, the look of someone watching a child run into a busy street. The fear in her eyes wasn't for herself, it was for me. "You have no idea what you've done," she whispered, her voice trembling so violently it was almost inaudible. "I made a promise. He doesn't know you exist. I promised he would never know you exist." "He doesn't know you exist." The words hung in the air, heavier and more chilling than any accusation of a simple affair. An affair is a betrayal of the past. This felt like a threat to my future. My mother wasn't just confessing to a secret. She was trying to shove it back into its box, terrified of what would happen now that it was out. A cold dread, far worse than the anger I'd been nursing for years, began to seep into my bones. Who was this man, this Michael O'Connell, whose very knowledge of my existence was something to be feared? My dad, Mark, seemed to deflate. The rage that had animated him moments before collapsed under the weight of this new, bizarre reality. He sank into the nearest patio chair, the one he had been so proudly occupying as king of the grill just an hour earlier. He looked small. He ran a hand over his face, his movement slow and weary, like a man who had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. "What does that even mean, Karen?" he asked, his voice hollowed out. "You're not making any sense. You had a one-night stand, you got pregnant, and you were scared to tell me. Fine, I get that. But this sounds like something else." The remaining family members were practically crawling out of their skins, desperate to escape but held captive by the sheer magnetic force of our family's implosion. Uncle David and Aunt Susan were frozen by the doorway to the kitchen, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, their faces pale. The party was over. The charade was done. My mother took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to regain some semblance of control. She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, leaving a smear of mascara on her cheek. "It wasn't a one-night stand, Mark," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "And it wasn't an affair." She finally turned to look at him, her eyes pleading for him to understand something he couldn't possibly comprehend. "I loved you. I have always, always loved you. This was before we were even serious." "Before?" Dad looked up, his confusion deepening. "We've been together since college, Karen. There was no before where you could have gotten pregnant with a 22-year-old. "Yes, there was," she insisted, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if the trees themselves were listening. "That summer. The summer after sophomore year. The summer we broke up for 3 months." I watched my dad's face as he mentally rewound the tape of his life. I could see the moment he found it, a brief, painful chapter they had never spoken of. A summer where he had studied abroad in Spain, and she had stayed behind, their relationship crumbling under the distance and immaturity. They had gotten back together in the fall, and the blip was forgotten, smoothed over by the rest of their shared history. Or so he thought. "That summer," he breathed, the realization dawning on him. You You were with someone else that summer." "His name was Michael," she said, and for the first time a flicker of something other than fear crossed her face. It was a ghost of a memory, faint and bittersweet. "He was working a summer job in my town. He was charismatic, and I was lonely and hurt. We had a whirlwind romance. It was just a summer thing. We both knew it had an end date. When you came back from Spain, Mark, it was over. I chose you. I have chosen you every single day since." The story sounded plausible, almost cliché. A summer romance, a lingering secret. It explained the timeline, but it didn't explain the terror. "So you got pregnant," Dad pushed, his voice hardening again. "You came back to school in September, pregnant, and you never said a word? You just passed Alex off as mine?" "No," she cried, her composure cracking again. "That's not what happened. I wasn't pregnant when I came back to school. I swear, we were careful. It wasn't until months later that I found out." The math didn't add up. If she got pregnant that summer, I would have been born in the spring. I was born in November. The discrepancy hung in the air, another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. I was the one who voiced it. "I was born in November, Mom," I said quietly, still kneeling by her side. "If you got pregnant that summer, I'd be 8 months older." My mother looked at me, her face crumbling. "Oh, Alex," she whispered, her voice thick with a sorrow so profound it felt ancient. "You don't understand." She reached out and cupped my face in her hand, her thumb stroking my cheek. It was a gesture she had done 1,000,000 times, but now it felt different, freighted with the weight of this colossal secret. When Michael left at the end of the summer, he didn't just disappear from my life. He was from a different kind of family, a dangerous family. His father was a powerful, possessive man. When Michael found out I was pregnant a few months later, she trailed off, her eyes darting around as if expecting someone to step out from behind the rose bushes. "He called me," she continued, her voice barely audible. "He was terrified. He said his father could never find out. He told me I had to get away, that I had to hide. He gave me money. He told me to disappear for my safety and for the baby's safety." A chilling silence descended. This wasn't a story about a cheating wife. This was something out of a movie, something dark and sinister. The smell of charcoal was completely gone, replaced by something acrid and metallic. Fear. My dad stood up again, his chair scraping loudly on the deck. "What are you talking about, Karen? A dangerous family? What is that supposed to mean? Is this guy in the mob or something?" He let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh, but it died in his throat. My mother just stared at him, her silence a terrifying answer in itself. "So you were pregnant," Dad pieced it together, his voice shaking. "You were pregnant and scared, and you came to me." The betrayal was fresh on his face, but now it was laced with a dawning, horrified pity. "You let me believe he was mine. You let me raise him, love him, all to hide him from his real father." "I did it to protect him," she shrieked, her voice finally breaking free in a torrent of anguish. "And to protect you. I loved you, Mark. I was terrified. I didn't know what else to do. I thought if we just moved on, if nobody ever knew, we could be a normal family. We were a normal family. A normal family built on a lie," he roared back. I felt like I was going to be sick. The foundation of my entire identity was quicksand. The man who taught me to ride a bike, who held my head over the toilet when I had the flu, who had teased me mercilessly my whole life, wasn't my father. And my biological father was some shadowy, dangerous figure who, until this moment, had no idea I even walked the earth. My mother had spent 22 years hiding me. A sickening thought surfaced. "You said Michael found out you were pregnant a few months later," I said slowly, my mind racing to connect the dots. "But I was born in November. How did he know about me before Dad did?" My mother's face went completely blank. The blood drained from it, leaving her lips a pale bluish line. She looked from me to Mark, her eyes wide with a new, unspeakable panic. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She had built a fortress of lies to protect me, and I had just handed my unknown father the battering ram. My dad's phone, which had been sitting on the patio table, suddenly buzzed. Then it buzzed again and again. A string of notifications lighting up the screen. Annoyed, he glanced down at it, his brow furrowed. "What the hell?" he muttered, picking it up. He swiped the screen open. We all watched as his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief and then to pure, cold shock. He lifted his head and stared at me, his eyes wide. "Alex," he said, his voice trembling, "my bank alert. I just got a notification. A $1 million deposit was just made into your college fund." He turned the phone around. On the screen was the transaction alert, clear as day. The sender's name listed for the transfer was short, simple, and utterly terrifying. It read, O'Connell, $1 million. The number just hung there in the air, obscene and impossible. It was a figure from a game show, a lottery ticket, not a real-life bank alert pinging on a phone amidst the wreckage of a suburban barbecue. My college fund, which I knew for a fact contained a respectable but decidedly non-million-dollar sum, painstakingly saved by Mark over 2 decades, had just been inflated by a ghost named O'Connell. My mother made a sound like a small, wounded animal. She scrambled for the phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grab it from Mark's stunned grip. She stared at the screen, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. No, it's not possible. How could he know? How could he possibly know?" The question was rhetorical, but the answer was standing right in front of her. Me. My DNA test. That stupid, selfish quest for validation had done more than expose a family secret. It had tripped a silent alarm I never knew existed. The lab I used, like all of them, had a database, a feature where you could opt in to connect with unknown relatives. I ticked the box without a second thought, vaguely curious about distant cousins. I never imagined I'd get a match that could trigger a 7-figure wire transfer within minutes of the truth coming out. Michael O'Connell, or someone in his family, must have been in that same database, waiting. "He found you," my mom breathed, her eyes locking onto mine. The fear she felt was no longer a vague, shadowy thing. It was immediate and sharp. "Alex, he knows where you are." Mark was on his feet, pacing the deck like a caged animal. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a surge of frantic, protective energy. "Who is this guy, Karen? You have to tell me, right now. Is he a criminal, a gangster? What kind of person just drops $1 million into a bank account they shouldn't even know exists?" "It's not him," she stammered, her gaze still fixed on me. "It's his father. It's always been his father. Patrick O'Connell." She said the name like a curse. Michael was terrified of him. Patrick controls everything, everyone in their family. He doesn't let things go. He doesn't let people go. Suddenly, the vague story of a dangerous family took on a much sharper, more terrifying shape. This wasn't just about some old money patriarch with a bad temper. This was something else entirely. "What do you mean, doesn't let people go?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The initial shock of the money was being replaced by a creeping, chilling dread. $1 million wasn't a gift. It was a summons. It was a leash. My mother finally broke eye contact with me and turned to Mark, a desperate, frantic plea in her eyes. "You don't understand the kind of man he is," she said, her voice trembling. "He's powerful, not just rich. The rules don't apply to him. When Michael told me to run, he said his father would see the baby as property, an heir, another piece of his empire to be controlled. Michael knew his father would take the baby from me. He said he would stop at nothing." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. My birth, my entire existence, had been an act of concealment. Mark hadn't just been a cuckolded husband, he had been my shield, My name, my suburban life, the stupid barbecue, it was all camouflage. My mother hadn't just lied to her husband, she had built a fortress around me, brick by painful brick, to hide me from a monster, and I had just torn it down with a cotton swab and a 10-page report. He thinks this is a down payment, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He thinks he can buy me. Before anyone could respond, my own phone, which I'd left on the arm of my chair, began to ring. The screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize. No caller ID, just a string of digits from an unknown area code. Every single person on that patio froze. The sound of the ringtone, a stupid indie pop song that usually made me smile, now sounded like a siren. "Don't answer it," my mother hissed, her eyes wide with panic. "Alex, please, don't answer that phone." But it was too late. The magnetic pull of the unknown was too strong. This was my life, my story. I couldn't hide behind my mother's fear anymore. My hand moved as if it had a will of its own. I picked up the phone and swiped to answer. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I lifted the phone to my ear, my throat suddenly dry. "Hello?" I managed to croak out. For a moment there was only silence on the other end, punctuated by the faint, almost imperceptible sound of ice clinking against a glass. Then a voice spoke. It was a man's voice, deep and smooth, with the faint melodic trace of an Irish accent that sounded both charming and utterly menacing. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed, a voice that had never had to raise its volume to command a room. "Alexander," the voice said, tasting my name as if trying it on for the first time. "I trust the preliminary gesture of goodwill was received?" I couldn't speak. My tongue felt thick and useless. The world had narrowed to this voice, this invisible presence that had haunted my life from a distance and was now, terrifyingly, on the line. "Your mother was a lovely girl," the voice continued, a note of cold nostalgia in his tone. "Spirited, but foolish. She thought she could hide a king from a kingdom. A foolish, sentimental notion." There was another pause, another clink of ice. "My son Michael was always a disappointment. Weak. But he did manage one thing of value in his short, unremarkable life. He made you." The casual cruelty of his words, the dismissal of the man who was my biological father, sent a shiver down my spine. "I've been aware of your existence for some time, Alexander," the voice said, his tone shifting, becoming sharper, more direct. "Your mother was clumsy. People talk. Money buys ears everywhere. I have respected her wishes, allowed her this little game of house because it suited me. You were an investment, maturing in a safe place. But your little genealogical stunt has, shall we say, accelerated the timeline. It's an announcement, a public declaration of your heritage, and the O'Connell family does not ignore its own." He took a sip of his drink. I could hear the swallow. It was the most intimate, terrifying sound I had ever heard. "I'm not your property," I finally managed to say, my voice a strangled whisper. Mark took a protective step closer to me, his hand hovering near my shoulder. The man on the phone chuckled, a low, humorless sound that held no warmth at all. "Oh, my boy," he said, "that's where you're mistaken. From the moment you were conceived, you are my blood, and what is mine, I keep." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Your mother made a deal 22 years ago. She took my son's money and my grandchild and ran. I'm a businessman, Alexander, and I am here to collect on that debt, with interest." My blood ran cold. This was a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. "Now," the voice said, all business. "We have a great deal to discuss, arrangements to be made. I've sent a car for you. It will be arriving at your location in approximately 90 seconds. A car is coming. 90 seconds. The words were spoken with such calm, absolute authority that they didn't sound like a suggestion or an offer. They sounded like a law of physics. The sun rises in the east, Gravity holds us to the earth, and when Patrick O'Connell sends a car, you get in it. A primal, instinctual fear, deeper than anything I had ever felt, seized me. My suburban backyard, with its manicured lawn and smoking grill, suddenly felt like a flimsy stage set about to be torn down by a hurricane. "No," Mark snarled, stepping in front of me as if to physically shield me from the voice on the phone. "You're not taking him anywhere. You stay the hell away from my son." He was shouting into the air, at an invisible enemy, his fists clenched at his sides. It was brave and futile, like yelling at a tidal wave. On the other end of the line, Patrick O'Connell sighed, a sound of weary disappointment. "Ah, the stepfather," he said, his voice laced with condescending amusement. "Mark, is it? The dutiful placeholder. I do appreciate the work you've put in, raising the boy. Consider the $1 million a severance package for your services. Now put Alexander back on the phone before you do something regrettable." The casual, dismissive way he said stepfather and placeholder was like a knife in Mark's gut. I saw the flash of pain in his eyes, the agony of having his entire life, his fatherhood, reduced to a temporary service contract. But the fear was stronger. "Alex, hang up the phone," my mother pleaded, her voice a ragged whisper. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "We have to go. We have to leave right now." But where could we go? If this man knew my name, my location, and my secret bank account, a head start of a few minutes was meaningless. He wasn't just a man. He was an entity, a network. "Money buys ears everywhere," he'd said. We were mice in a maze he had designed. 75 seconds, the voice on the phone purred, as if counting down to a New Year's ball drop. My mind was spinning. The family members who hadn't fled were pressed against the back wall of the house like hostages, their faces ashen. This was so far beyond a family argument that it felt like we'd slipped into an alternate reality. My Uncle David, who an hour ago I had despised, now looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, a shared victim in a drama far bigger than his own marital indiscretions. I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at my mother. "What happened to Michael?" I asked, the question clawing its way out of my throat. "He said Michael had a short, unremarkable life." "What did he mean by that?" My mother's face, already a mask of despair, seemed to shatter. "Don't," she sobbed, shaking her head violently. "Don't ask that." "I have to know, Mom. Who is this man? What did he do?" But it was Patrick O'Connell who answered. His voice, crisp and clear from the phone still in my hand, cut through the air. "My son was a sentimental fool. He had a crisis of conscience about what he had done to your mother. A few months after you were conceived, he threatened to defy me, to run away with her and the child. He chose love over family, loyalty and business. It was an unacceptable choice." The line went silent for a moment. The ice clinked in his glass again. The sound was deliberate, punctuating his words with a chilling finality. "He died in a car accident that winter," Patrick said, his voice utterly devoid of emotion. "A tragic single-vehicle incident on a lonely road. Such a shame." The unspoken threat was deafening. He hadn't just arranged a car accident, he was boasting about it. He was telling me, in no uncertain terms, what happened to people, even his own son who defied him. Michael O'Connell hadn't died in an accident. He had been erased, and I was the last piece of evidence he left behind. 30 seconds, Alexander." "We're calling the police," Mark declared, fumbling for his own phone. Patrick laughed. It was a genuine, booming laugh this time, and it was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. "Oh, please do," he said. "Tell them what exactly? That a man you've never met has deposited $1 million into your son's account and offered him a ride. I own half the judges in this state, Mr. Placeholder. The police will spend more time investigating your sudden good fortune than they will my phone call." He was right. We had no proof, no evidence of a crime. We only had a mother's 22-year-old story and a phone call from a ghost. We were trapped. I looked at Mark, at his fierce, protective stance. I looked at my mother, crumpled and broken by the weight of the secret she had carried. I had done this. My selfish need for answers, my petty desire for revenge against the man who had raised me, had brought this monster to our door. I had thought I was dropping a bombshell. I hadn't realized I was lighting a fuse connected to a nuclear warhead. And then, through the quiet suburban hum of a Sunday afternoon, I heard it. The low, deep purr of a high-end engine growing steadily closer. A sleek black sedan, the kind you see in movies escorting presidents or villains, turned onto our street. Its windows were tinted so dark they looked like polished obsidian. It slowed as it approached our house, its movement smooth and predatory. It didn't just stop. It came to a halt with an unnerving, silent precision, perfectly parallel to our curb, directly in front of our driveway. "Time's up," Patrick O'Connell's voice said in my ear. The back door of the sedan opened with a soft, expensive-sounding click. It was an invitation, an order. I had a choice. I could refuse and see what this man would do to the only family I had ever known. He had killed his own son for defying him. What would he do to a man he considered a placeholder and the woman who had stolen his grandchild? Or I could go, walk into the belly of the beast, and try to protect them from the consequences of my own actions. My body moved before my brain could argue. I took a step forward, off the deck and onto the grass. "Alex! No!" my mother screamed, lunging for me. Mark caught her, holding her back as she struggled. "Don't you go anywhere!" he yelled at me, his voice cracking with desperation and fear. I turned to look at them, framed in the doorway of the home I grew up in. The smell of the dying barbecue, the scattered lawn chairs, the half-eaten plates of food, it all looked like a scene from someone else's life. "I have to," I said, my voice sounding strangely calm to my own ears. "He'll hurt you if I don't." I looked from my mother's devastated face to Mark's terrified one. The man who wasn't my father, but who had been a father to me in every way that mattered. The man whose stupid joke had set this whole nightmare in motion. "I love you, Dad," I said, the word finally feeling right, finally feeling earned in the worst possible moment. I turned my back on them and walked across the lawn. Each step was heavy, a march toward an unknown, terrifying future. The car loomed in front of me, its open door like the maw of some great dark beast. I reached the curb, my hand shaking as I reached for the door frame. Just before I ducked inside, a new voice spoke from the phone, still pressed against my ear. It was no longer Patrick O'Connell. This voice was younger, female, and carried a clipped professional tone. "Mr. O'Connell has concluded his call," she said. "But he asked me to pass along one final piece of information for you, Alexander. He thought you should know. Your mother wasn't the clumsy one. We didn't find you through a DNA database. We found you through your father." I froze, my hand on the car. "What? My father's dead." "Patrick O'Connell is your grandfather," the voice corrected smoothly. "I'm speaking of your father, Michael. He's the one who put his own DNA into the database 6 months ago. He's been looking for you." The woman's words hit me with the force of a physical impact, knocking the air from my lungs. "Michael put his DNA in the database. He's been looking for you." It was a statement so fundamentally at odds with the reality I had just been presented with that my brain couldn't process it. He was dead. A tragic car accident. A story told with the chilling finality of a murderer boasting of his crime. But this woman, this calm, professional voice on the phone, was telling me my father was alive. "That's a lie," I choked out, my voice raspy. My knuckles were white where I gripped the car door. "Your boss, my grandfather, he just told me Michael was dead." From the backyard, I could hear my mother's frantic sobs. She must have heard. I could picture her, held back by Mark, her world, which had already been shattered, now being ground into dust. The lie she had built her life on was a lie within a lie. The woman on the phone let out a small, almost pitying sigh. "Mr. O'Connell is a storyteller, Alexander. He uses narratives to achieve his objectives. The story of your father's tragic death was a test, a way to gauge your reaction, to establish control, to demonstrate the consequences of defiance. It was a very effective story, wouldn't you agree? My blood ran cold. It wasn't a confession of murder. It was a psychological weapon. Patrick hadn't been boasting about killing his son. He had been demonstrating his willingness to kill his son. He had murdered Michael in effigy, right in front of me, to ensure my absolute compliance. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. "Where is he?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a fresh wave of adrenaline, a chaotic mix of terror and a wild, desperate hope. Is he okay?" "Michael is perfectly fine," the woman said smoothly. "He is, however, currently indisposed, under his father's care, let's say." Patrick was quite displeased when he discovered Michael's little genealogical search. It was an unauthorized emotional expenditure, but it did lead us to you, so in the end, it served a purpose. He was a prisoner. My father was a prisoner in his own home, and his search for me was what had gotten him caught. And now, I was walking willingly into the same cage. The black sedan idled silently, a patient predator. I was still standing on the curb, caught between two impossible worlds. Behind me was the life I knew, the parents who had raised me, now trapped in a nightmare of my making. In front of me was a car that would take me to a grandfather who was a monster, and a father I'd never met, who had apparently risked everything to find me. I looked back at the house. Mark was no longer holding my mother back. They were standing together, clinging to each other, their faces etched with a shared terror and confusion. Mark's eyes met mine across the lawn. In them, I saw no more anger, no more betrayal. There was only fear for me. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Don't go." But Patrick's test, his brutal story, had worked. I was terrified of what he would do to them if I defied him. He didn't need to kill them. He could ruin them. Financially, legally. He could orchestrate a tragic accident for Mark, just as he had for his own son in his little story. He had made it clear that there was no line he wouldn't cross. "Get in the car, Alexander," the woman's voice commanded, the professional courtesy gone, replaced by a cold, sharp edge. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I finally ducked my head and slid into the back of the car. The door closed behind me with a heavy, satisfying thud, the sound of a vault being sealed. The silence inside was immediate and absolute, cutting off the sounds of my mother's crying and the quiet suburban street. It was like being plunged underwater. The interior was all black leather and polished wood, smelling of money and antiseptic cleanliness. There was a tinted glass partition between me and the driver, who remained a faceless silhouette. The car began to move, pulling away from the curb with a silent, electric grace. I watched through the dark-tinted window as my house, my yard, and my parents grew smaller and smaller. They stood there, two small figures on a perfect green lawn, watching their son be driven away into a life they couldn't have imagined in their worst nightmares. This was my fault. I owned this. The phone was still in my hand. "Where are you taking me?" I asked. "To the O'Connell estate," the woman replied. "Your grandfather is eager to meet you, and there's someone else here who has been waiting a very long time to see you." Hope, sharp and painful, pierced through the fear. Michael. I was going to meet my father. The journey was a blur. We drove out of my quiet suburban town and onto a highway, leaving the world of manicured lawns and family barbecues behind. We drove for what felt like an hour, moving into wealthier and more secluded territory, where the houses became mansions and the fences became stone walls. Finally, we turned off the main road and passed through a set of enormous wrought iron gates, a golden O emblazoned in the center. A private road snaked through a landscape that looked more like a national park than a private yard. The car finally pulled to a stop in a circular driveway in front of a house that was less a house and more a stone fortress. It was a sprawling, Gothic-looking mansion that seemed to glower down at the perfectly manicured grounds. This was the kingdom Patrick O'Connell had spoken of. The driver's door opened, and a man in a black suit got out. He came around and opened my door. He was built like a refrigerator with a blank, emotionless face and an earpiece tucked into one ear. He didn't say a word, just gestured for me to get out. My legs felt unsteady as I stepped onto the gravel driveway. The air here felt different, heavier, charged with power and secrets. The man in the suit led me up a grand stone staircase to a set of oak doors that must have been 20 feet high. He pushed them open, and they swung inward without a sound. The inside was even more intimidating than the outside. A cavernous foyer with a marble floor, a sweeping double staircase, and a chandelier the size of a small car. It was opulent and cold, a museum dedicated to wealth. And standing at the foot of the staircase, a drink in his hand, was a man who could only be Patrick O'Connell. He was older, perhaps in his early 70s, but he stood with the straight-backed posture of a military general. He had a full head of thick white hair, piercing blue eyes, and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first year of college. This was the man whose voice had terrified me over the phone. In person, his presence was a physical force, sucking the very air out of the room. He smiled, a thin, predatory curve of his lips. "Alexander," he said, his voice the same smooth, Irish-accented purr from the phone. "Welcome home." I just stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't find my voice. "You have your mother's eyes," he continued, taking a step toward me, circling me like a shark examining its prey. "But the rest of you, the height, the build, that's all O'Connell. It's good to see. Strong blood." He stopped in front of me, his blue eyes boring into mine. "Your arrival has been long awaited. We have much to discuss about your future, your education, your role in this family. The life you knew is over. Your real life begins today." My throat was still tight, but I forced the words out. "Where is Michael?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Where is my father?" Patrick's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of something cold and hard passed through his eyes. "Patience, boy, all in good time." He turned and gestured toward a large, ornate door off the foyer. "First, there's someone you need to meet. Your grandmother. She's been most eager to see the boy who has caused all this commotion." He led the way, and the suited man gave me a slight nudge from behind, leaving me no choice but to follow. We entered a lavish drawing room, filled with antique furniture and priceless art. Sitting in a high-backed armchair by a large, unlit fireplace was a woman. She was elderly and frail, draped in a cashmere shawl, her face a road map of wrinkles. Her hair was as white as Patrick's, and her hands, clutching a porcelain teacup, were gnarled with age. She looked up as we entered, her eyes a faded, watery blue, fixing on me with a startling intensity. Patrick put a hand on my shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. "Eleonora," he said, his voice softening ever so slightly. "This is him. This is Alexander, Michael's boy." The old woman, Eleonora, stared at me for a long moment. Her teacup rattled in its saucer. A strange, unreadable expression crossed her face, a mixture of grief, wonder, and something else. Something that looked like fear. Then she spoke, her voice a reedy, trembling whisper that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 secrets. "Patrick, you fool," she breathed, her eyes never leaving my face. "Look at him. Can't you see? He looks nothing like Michael." The old woman's words fell into the cavernous silence of the drawing room like stones into a deep well. "He looks nothing like Michael." For a single stretched-out moment, nobody moved. The statement was so contrary to the narrative Patrick had been building, so completely out of left field, that it short-circuited the entire confrontation. I stared at the frail woman in the chair, my mind reeling. My entire life had been a lie, and now it seemed the lie I had just uncovered was itself another, more complex deception. Patrick O'Connell's mask of calm, absolute control finally cracked. A flash of pure fury crossed his face. "Eleonora, don't be a sentimental old fool," he snapped, his voice a low growl. "He's the boy. The DNA test confirms it. You're just letting grief cloud your judgment." "Grief has made my judgment clearer than yours has been in 30 years, she retorted, her reedy voice gaining a surprising strength. She set her teacup down on a nearby table with a decisive clink. "DNA." She spat the word like it was a foul taste in her mouth. "You put your faith in science and printouts. I put my faith in my own eyes. I knew my son. I held him. I raised him. This boy does not share his face." She turned her watery blue eyes back to me, but this time they weren't just examining me, they were searching for something. "He has your eyes, Patrick, the same cold fire, but the face, the hair, the shape of his jaw, that is not my Michael." I felt like a specimen under a microscope, being dissected by this family of strangers. Who was I? The question that had started this whole nightmare was now more fractured and uncertain than ever. "Enough!" Patrick boomed, taking a step toward her. But before he could continue, a door on the far side of the room opened. A younger man, maybe in his late 40s, with dark hair, a tired face, and the same blue O'Connell eyes, stepped into the room. He was wearing a simple sweater and slacks, looking completely out of place in the opulent room. When he saw me, he froze. My heart leaped into my throat. This had to be him, Michael. He looked at me, his expression a storm of emotions, shock, hope, regret, and a deep, soul-crushing sadness. He was thinner than I had imagined, and he carried himself with the weary resignation of a man who had been defeated long ago. "Alexander?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Is it true?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Were you looking for me?" He nodded, a pained expression on his face. "For years," he said, "I never stopped thinking about you, about your mother. I was a coward. I let him," he gestured toward Patrick, "scare me. It's the greatest regret of my life." Patrick let out a derisive snort. "Regret is a luxury of the weak. The boy is here now, that's all that matters. He is an O'Connell." "Is he?" Eleonora, the grandmother, challenged again, her gaze flicking between Michael and me. "Look at him, Michael, truly look." Michael did. He took a hesitant step closer, his eyes scanning my features. The hope in his face slowly began to curdle into a profound confusion. He doesn't," he stammered, looking from me to his father. "He doesn't look like I thought he would." The entire foundation of Patrick O'Connell's plan was crumbling, undermined not by me, but by his own family. All his power, all his money couldn't change what his wife and son were seeing with their own eyes. And that's when it hit me. A memory, a small, insignificant detail from years ago. It was a picture in a dusty photo album my mom kept in the attic. An old, faded photograph of her own father, my maternal grandfather, who had died long before I was born. A man I'd never met. A lanky man with a shock of unruly dark hair and eyes so dark they were almost black. A man who looked, I now realized, with a dizzying, head-spinning certainty, exactly like me. The DNA test. It had confirmed Michael was a close relative, a father, an uncle, a half-brother. I had jumped to the most obvious conclusion, the one my mother's terrified reaction had seemed to confirm. But what if it wasn't the right one? "Your brother," I said, the words coming out in a rush, my eyes locked on Michael. "Did you have a brother?" The question hung in the air. Michael looked utterly bewildered, but it was Eleonora who answered, her voice trembling. "We did," she whispered, a tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on her cheek. "My firstborn, Daniel. He was wild, uncontrollable. He refused to be a part of this this business. She glanced at her husband with a look of pure venom. Patrick disowned him, cast him out. Daniel left for America when he was 19. We never heard from him again. The pieces of the puzzle began to slam into place, forming a picture that was both insane and perfectly logical. My mother's story, a summer romance, a whirlwind. She never said the boy's name was Michael O'Connell. She said his name was Michael. We had all just assumed. But what if she had met the other O'Connell brother, the outcast, the one who had nothing to do with this dangerous family? What if her Michael was just Michael? A boy named Michael, with a different last name, who had been her summer fling. But the DNA... The lab, I said, thinking out loud. The lab that did the test. It's an O'Connell subsidiary, isn't it? I looked at Patrick, and the flicker of a smirk on his face was all the confirmation I needed. He hadn't just found me. He had manipulated the result. The test had likely shown a paternal link to the O'Connell family, to my real father, Daniel, the disowned son. But Patrick had intercepted it. He had made sure the name that came up wasn't his lost son, but his captive one. He had tried to substitute one heir for another. My mother wasn't hiding from you, I said to Patrick, the full, beautiful, terrible truth finally dawning on me. She didn't even know you existed. She was hiding me from my father, her Michael, the one she was with that summer, the stories she told us, the money, the danger. She made it all up on the spot. She was terrified, and she saw the name O'Connell on that report and assumed the worst. She created a monster in her head because she couldn't bear to tell the real, simple, heartbreaking truth. I turned to Mark. I wasn't there, but I could see him so clearly in my mind. She lied to protect Dad, I whispered in the silent room. She was pregnant with another man's child, and she was scared he would leave her. That's the whole story. There's no mob. There's no danger. There's just a 20-year-old lie that spun out of control. Patrick O'Connell's face was a thundercloud. His perfect plan, his stolen heir, had been undone by a ghost and a faded photograph. He had been so obsessed with finding an heir to his kingdom that he hadn't bothered to look closely at the boy he was trying to claim. He just saw the name, the bloodline, and assumed ownership. I looked at Michael, my uncle. For the first time, I saw a flicker of defiance in his eyes. He looked at his father, then at me, then at his mother. The intricate web of control his father had woven for decades was starting to unravel. I took a step back toward the door. "I'm not your property," I said to Patrick, my voice clear and steady. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound, liberating certainty. "I'm not my father's, or my uncle's, or yours. My name is Alex, and the man who raised me, my real dad, is Mark, and I'm going home." For a second, I thought Patrick would stop me, that he'd have the silent man in the suit restrain me, but he just stood there, his empire of lies crumbling around him, defeated by the simple, inconvenient truth. He had lost. Getting a ride was easier than I thought. Michael, in his first act of rebellion in what was likely a lifetime, drove me himself. We sat in a stunned, near-total silence until we were back on the highway, the Gothic mansion shrinking in the rearview mirror. "My brother, Daniel," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "I always wondered what happened to him." "I think I'm going to try and find him," I said. It was a new quest, but this time, it wasn't for me. It was for him, and for the grandfather I never knew I had. When Michael's car pulled up to my house, the sun was beginning to set. The abandoned barbecue was still there, a sad monument to the day's chaos. My mom and Mark were sitting on the front steps, waiting. When they saw me get out of the car, they both shot to their feet. My mom ran to me, wrapping me in a hug so tight it felt like she was trying to put all my broken pieces back together. Over her shoulder, I met Mark's eyes. I saw 100 questions there, but underneath it all, I saw relief. I saw love. Later that night, after I had told them everything, the real, messy, unsensational truth, we sat in the living room. The silence was no longer tense, just tired. "So," Mark said, breaking the quiet, "your biological father was a runaway O'Connell brother. And my brother is just my brother. And your mom is a really, really convincing liar when she's panicking." My mom winced, but a small smile touched her lips. "I'm so sorry, Mark." He reached over and took her hand. "We'll deal with that," he said softly. "We're a family. It's what we do." Then he looked at me. "But there's still one thing I don't get, Alex." "What's that?" He got a strange, familiar twinkle in his eye, the one he always got before telling a bad joke. "That $1 million deposit. Does this mean you can finally pay me back for all the food you've eaten for the past 22 years? Because I'm telling you, the grace of a newborn giraffe doesn't come cheap." I looked at him, at his stupid, grinning face. And for the first time in my entire life, when my dad made a joke at my expense, I laughed,